The blazing sun cast harsh shadows across the dusty town center. Sarah Mills found herself being hauled forward by rough hands, her worn boots dragging trails in the parched earth. 3 townsmen gripped her arms tightly, pushing her toward the crowd that had gathered like vultures. Her simple brown dress hung in tatters, stained with mud and streaked with crimson from scraped elbows and torn skin. A makeshift desk had been positioned in the heart of the assembly, documents spread across its weathered surface. Pastor Grimm brought his palm down hard against the wood, his voice booming across the square. "Put your mark to this paper, woman. Confess your dealings with unholy forces." Sarah's fingers trembled as she fought to steady herself. "I cannot do such a thing. My remedies come from the earth, not from darkness. I have brought harm to no one." Deputy Marshal Tom Ridge stepped closer, reeking of cheap liquor and tobacco. "Refuse us and the hanging tree will have its due," he growled, his yellowed teeth showing in a cruel grin. Sarah's voice wavered but held firm. "I will not bear false witness against myself." The mob erupted in angry shouts. A piece of spoiled fruit struck her shoulder. Dust kicked up from stamping feet. "She brought the plague to our young ones." Someone screamed. "Our livestock died because of her." Another voice added, "Devil woman." Came a shriek from the back. Pastor Grimm's eyes burned with zealous fire as he forced the writing instrument into Sarah's palm, wrapping her shaking fingers around it. The ink blotted and ran as her hand quivered uncontrollably. The pen slipped from her grasp, clattering to the ground as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I will not sign falsehoods," she whispered. Ridge nodded grimly. "Then we proceed to judgment." The men hauled Sarah toward the riverbank, where an ancient oak stretched its gnarled branches skyward like the arms of death itself. The merciless sun beat down as she gasped for air, her body already battered and broken. They wound heavy hemp around her middle, cinching it until breathing became a struggle. Her wrists were bound behind her back, her ankles lashed together with rope that bit deep into tender flesh. Every knot sent fire through her injured limbs. The men heaved on the line, jerking her upward until the rope caught against a thick branch. Her torso hung suspended while her head and arms dangled toward the ground. Her long hair fell like a dark veil across her face. Her bound feet pointed uselessly at the earth below. Sarah made a sound of pure anguish, too faint for compassion. No mercy came. The crowd dispersed, content with their brutal verdict, abandoning her to the scorching emptiness of midday. She swayed gently in the hot breeze while the great oak creaked as though mourning her fate. Tears streamed down her face as memories flooded back, the sick children whose burning skin had cooled beneath her touch, her grandmother's lullabies that once promised better days ahead. Now hope felt as dry and brittle as autumn leaves. Her lips moved soundlessly. "I sought only to heal." The sun seared her exposed back while perspiration and blood mixed on her skin. Each attempt to draw breath came shallow and painful. Her sight grew dim as the sky above blazed white-hot. Her body went limp against the restraints, yet still she managed to whisper, "I harbor no evil in my heart." But the settlement had already pronounced her guilty. The empty streets offered no compassion, the shuttered homes no kindness, only crushing silence. In that stillness, Sarah understood the reality. Pastor Grimm had despised her plant medicines because his own remedies gathered dust on unused shelves. Deputy Ridge had feared her healing gifts because the railway company compensated him to drive people from their land. They required a scapegoat to spread terror and force folks to flee. So they fashioned her into their monster. Insects buzzed in the tall prairie grass. The stream gurgled past the muddy bank below. The town had vanished, yet condemnation hung thick in the stifling air. Sarah shut her eyes, surrendering to hopelessness. But from far off came the rhythmic pounding of horseshoes against hard earth. Measured, heavy, approaching. Was this another tormentor? Or perhaps the single soul brave enough to challenge an entire community's lies? Jake Morrison reined in his mount beneath the towering oak. The scene before him would haunt any decent man's dreams. A young woman, scarcely past girlhood, hung motionless from the rope, her form bent like a wind-broken sapling. Jake stood motionless for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his chest tight with rage. Then he stepped forward, drew his hunting blade, and cut through the rope with one clean stroke. Sarah fell into his waiting arms, light as thistledown, yet bearing the full burden of the town's cruelty. He settled her carefully across his saddle, swung up behind her, and turned toward his homestead. The journey passed in silence, though his thoughts churned violently. What drove a community to string up a girl in broad daylight and leave her to perish? By the time they reached his ranch, sweat had soaked through his shirt, and her torn dress was damp with blood and grime. Jake carried her inside, laying her gently on a narrow bed near the stone fireplace. He brought a metal cup of cool water to her cracked lips. At first she remained still as death. Then her eyelids fluttered open, wide and filled with terror. She gasped, pushing his hand away. Jake spoke in gentle tones. "You are protected here. Please drink." Her throat worked as she swallowed the precious liquid. Then the tears began to flow. Through parched lips, she managed to speak. "They named me a sorceress. They struck me, dragged me through the dirt, claimed I had cursed their animals. But I only sought to bring healing." Jake leaned back, listening intently. Her voice shook but carried enough strength to hold his attention completely. She described how she used wild plants to break children's fevers, how she prepared bark tea for men whose lungs were ruined by harsh winters, how she refused payment when families possessed nothing to give. Jake rubbed his stubbled chin, frowning deeply. This sounded nothing like evil witchcraft. This sounded exactly like his own dear mother had been. He rose and retrieved a worn leather journal that had rested on his shelf for many years. The yellowed pages smelled of age and wood smoke. It contained his mother's careful notes on every healing remedy she had ever employed. Jake turned through the entries until he found what he sought. There it was, dried sage, willow bark, wild mint, the very same plant Sarah had mentioned. His voice was quiet but certain. "These match every cure my mother ever recorded." "You have done nothing wrong." Sarah gazed at him, her eyes still wet but now holding a glimmer of renewed hope. For the first time since morning, she managed a small smile. Not broad, not brilliant, but enough to show her spirit remained unbroken. Jake settled back in his chair as flames danced in the hearth, casting shifting shadows on the log walls. He had saved her from the noose, but instinct told him the struggle was far from finished. Men like Deputy Ridge and Pastor Grimm never surrendered easily. As darkness deepened, Jake caught a subtle sound from outside, the steady crunch of heavy boots on gravel. Someone approached with purpose. But friend or foe? Jake rose from his seat, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his side. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate on the rocky ground. Then came 3 sharp raps on the wooden door. "Open up, Morrison! You're sheltering the witch girl. Hand her over before we torch your place to ash." Jake threw the door wide. A massive brute stood there, his face twisted with malice, a wicked blade gleaming at his belt. The man's lips curled in a nasty grin as his eyes searched past Jake toward the corner where Sarah lay, weak upon the cot. "You got no right keeping her. She belongs at the end of that rope." Jake wasted no breath on words. His pistol appeared instantly, the barrel pressed firmly against the intruder's chest. The grin vanished in an instant. "Take another step on my property and it'll be your last. Now move." The man froze, his eyes gone wide, then stumbled backward into the darkness, spitting curses as he retreated. Jake slammed the door shut and threw the heavy bolt. Sarah stared at him in amazement. "You put everything at risk for my sake." Jake met her gaze, steady as granite. "No, I only risked what was already mine to gamble." The ranch fell quiet once more, with only the crackling fire for company. But Jake's mind found no rest. He knew this confrontation was merely the beginning. Deputy Ridge and Pastor Grimm would not relent. They would twist reality until every soul in the settlement believed Sarah had brought them ruin. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "If we mean to clear your name, we need evidence. Real, undeniable proof." When night fell complete, Jake prepared his horse for travel. Sarah climbed up behind him, grasping the saddle despite her weakness, but filled with determination. They rode through the darkness, prairie wind cutting sharp across their faces. At Ridge's storage barn, they discovered the truth. Containers of grain mixed with strange powder. On wooden shelves, glass bottles filled with white arsenic, the very poison used to sicken livestock and contaminate water sources. Jake's expression hardened like iron. But the worst revelation came when they crept near the community well. A figure knelt there, sprinkling pale dust into the water supply. Jake cocked his weapon. "Drop it, now." The man froze, caught in the act. Sarah's voice shook with righteous anger. "They blamed me while you were the true villain all along." The man's guilty silence spoke volumes. Jake knew they finally possessed what they needed to expose the conspiracy. They held the evidence in their grasp. But could they persuade an entire town that had already chosen to believe a convenient lie? Dawn arrived with harsh light flooding the prairie. The town square filled early with restless people, their voices sharp with anticipation. Pastor Grimm stood atop a wooden crate, Bible clutched in one fist, saliva flying as he shouted his accusations. "This girl brought pestilence to our homes. She cursed your families. Today we complete the work we began." Deputy Ridge stood beside him, arms folded, projecting false authority. Sarah was absent, but the crowd expected her swift return for final judgment. Then came the sound of approaching hooves. Jake Morrison rode in slowly, sitting straight in his saddle with Sarah holding fast behind him. Every eye turned as the horse halted before the makeshift platform. Jake dismounted and withdrew something heavy from his saddlebag, a jar of white powder. He set it on the ground for all to witness. "This is arsenic, not sorcery. Poison deliberately placed in your feed and water supply," the crowd murmured uneasily. Grimm raised his voice higher. "Do not listen. He has fallen under her spell." But then Jake dragged forward the man they had caught at the well, hands bound, head hanging in shame. Jake's voice rang hard as steel. "Tell them what you did." The man stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "I was paid good money. Ridge supplied the poison. Pastor Grimm told me exactly where to use it." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Sarah stepped down from the horse, her voice clear despite lingering weakness. "You feared the truth of my healing arts, so you branded me a witch." "But your own greed poisoned this community," Grimm screamed. "Lies and deception!" But Jake had more to reveal. He produced a silver coin, dropping it into a bucket of well water. The metal turned black before their horrified eyes. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men cursed under their breath. The proof could not be denied. Grimm's face went pale as bleached bone. Ridge reached for his gun, but Jake proved faster. The rancher's pistol cocked, steady in his experienced hand, daring the deputy to draw. Ridge hesitated fatally. Then two men from the crowd rushed forward, seizing his arms. "Enough!" one declared. "We see what's real now." The people turned their fury from Sarah to the men who had betrayed their trust. For the first time since rope had cut into her flesh, Sarah stood tall and vindicated before her own community. Yet Jake understood one harsh truth. A town might change its mind quickly, but trust heals far more slowly. Would they truly stand with her now, or would whispers of fear return when darkness fell again? The crowd remained frozen in the square, expressions shifting from doubt to shame as the lies of Pastor Grimm and Deputy Ridge crumbled completely. Exposed in daylight's harsh truth, Sarah faced the people who had once spat at her feet. Some avoided her gaze. Others wiped away tears of regret, too proud to admit they had been deceived so easily. She drew a slow breath, her chest still aching from her ordeal, yet her voice carried clearly across the silent square. "I never brought curses upon you. I brought healing. And despite everything you have done, I would do the same again." Heavy silence stretched until an elderly woman stepped forward, leading a small boy by the hand. His cheeks glowed pink with health, no longer ashen with sickness. The woman's voice broke with emotion. "My grandson draws breath because of her plant medicines. She saved him when no physician would make the journey." A wave spread through the crowd, whispers transforming into nods of recognition. One by one, faces lifted. One by one, they saw Sarah not as an evil sorceress, but as a healer who had served them faithfully. Jake stood beside her, his steady hand upon her shoulder. The deputy was led away in disgrace, while Grimm slunk into the shadows with no remaining allies to protect him. In that moment, the entire community shifted. They had nearly murdered an innocent woman, yet she chose to stand with dignity before them still. That was true courage. That was genuine grace. Jake leaned close and spoke for her ears alone. "You are free now. What will you do with that freedom?" Sarah's eyes shimmered in the bright sunlight. "I will remain here. I will continue healing, if you will stand beside me." Jake removed the faded bandana from around his neck, worn soft with dust and years, and placed it gently around hers. It represented more than cloth. It was a solemn promise. Together they walked from the square side by side, leaving behind fear and falsehood. Though whispers might linger and doubt could return, the seed of truth had been planted deep in good soil. Some lessons of the frontier are carved in wood and stone, but others are carved in the hearts of those who choose to take a stand. What about you? Would you have looked away? Or would you have stood beside her when the rope tightened around her waist? Would you have chosen fear, or would you have chosen truth? Stories like this remind us that justice often hangs by the thinnest thread, and sometimes it takes just one hand to cut that rope. When faced with a crowd's fury and lies that seem convenient, will you be the voice that speaks for what is right?